Dante wrote, "The path to paradise begins in hell." Join Deacon Prendergast and David Fortin as they discuss the tools men need to build the domestic church and the spiritual weapons to defend it. This is Through the Fire.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of Through the Fire. I'm David Fortin, joined by Deacon Prendergast.
Hey.
Hey, Bemus Papum.
Hey, Bemus Papum. Yeah, we have a pope.
You know, Deacon, I heard somebody in the news describing, which I thought was a spot-on description of our new Pope Leo. They say that he is the culmination of the last three pontificates, in that he has the same zeal for the faith JP2 had, that he has the theological chops of Benedict XVI,
right,
and he has that pastoral sensibility about him as Pope Francis had.
It's really exciting. I mean, he definitely, he's citizen of the United States, citizen of Peru, a missionary. He's a canon lawyer. He's a White Sox fan, but we're not going to hold that against him. He really does seem to really be impressive. My pastor was commenting at Mass, talking about him, and he was commenting on how Pope Leo XIV has already started to kind of drive home the point to the other cardinals that, we all have to work together, and we have to be followers of the teachings of Jesus, and we have to be mindful not to allow ourselves to be followers of the teachings in the world. And so it's really exciting. We all pray for the repose of the soul of Pope Francis, and we also celebrate at the same time our new Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, which even the name, now you have to, even he made the connection to Pope Leo XIII, and it's from Pope Leo XIII that we get the St. Michael prayer.
Yep.
A lot of people may not be familiar with this, but it was a vision that Pope Leo XIII had where he saw Jesus and the devil arguing with each other, if you will. And the devil says to Jesus, "Give me like 75 to 100 years and I'm going to destroy the church." And I can only imagine Jesus like chuckling to himself. It's like, really? Okay, do your best. And Pope Leo, through this vision, he was the one that authored the St. Michael prayer. And for up until like the 60s, from that time forward to about the 60s or so, the St. Michael prayer was prayed at the end of Mass everywhere. And in my parish, we still, we do that. We pray the St. Michael prayer at the end of every Mass. It's exciting to see that Pope Leo XIV really recognizes that, we do have a spiritual war that's going on. And, here we have the Holy See now has a lion in Pope Leo XIV. So it's super exciting. It's really exciting.
Yeah, Deacon, I just do have to remind you of one thing. Do you remember before the whole conclave had gone on, you and I were talking, and you said there'd never be an American Pope?
Oh, yeah. I am blown away. Maybe we got this squeaker in, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe we got this exception because Pope Leo XIV also spent decades as a missionary in Peru, and so there's that South American influence also. He really is, as Cardinal Dolan, the cardinal from the Archdiocese of New York, as he has said in some of the interviews, he really is a man of the world.
Yeah,
and through his missionary life as an Augustinian and just all that he's done in Peru and whatnot. So it's exciting. Yeah, I'm blown away. I mean, it's kind of cool. I never thought that we would have an American Pope because some of the more obvious reasons. The United States is an economic leader in the world. The United States is a political leader in the world. And so the idea of having a Pope who is from the United States, it gives, my estimation, I thought that it would give an impression that the United States is now this, humongous entity that dominates all aspects of humanity. And obviously I was completely wrong. And so, we celebrate this. This is cool.
Yeah, it's a great time now. Our friend Pat King was talking about the explosion of Catholicism coming back to parts of Europe, that Catholicism is actually outnumbering the Church of England.
Yeah,
now.
it's pretty cool.
And it's had a big effect in France. It's sort of coming together really,
It is.
really strong.
I really do believe that all of us, under our new leadership of Pope Leo XIV, all of us are called to be missionaries. Every one of us. It's part of the evangelical movement of the church. Every one of us, we're all called to be missionaries. Dave, you and I, through this radio show, we seek to spread this message. We're heard on secular radio stations. The Punishers Motorcycle Club, we're on their radio platform. And really, we're all called to be missionaries, to go out. And another thing that Pope Leo XIV has already been called is being a bridge builder. And what's the point in building bridges if you're going to stay with what's comfortable and familiar? But you got to get out there. You got to get out there and boldly profess the gospel truth. And that brings us to our topic today, right?
Yeah. Hey, Deacon, I've been kind of reading and thinking a lot about the Beatitudes. The first one that comes to mind, and over the next few weeks, I really like to spend some time talking with you about these Beatitudes.
Sure.
Because they seem to me to be a pathway to holiness and a virtuous life.
Well, we can look at the Beatitudes just right off the top. We can look at the Beatitudes as kind of like the entire gospel message boiled down to these elements, or we can kind of think of like this is Jesus's own manifesto, where if you focus on the Beatitudes, if you understand what they mean, what they're calling you to do, how they're calling you to live, you will encompass the totality of the gospel message.
With that said, can we discuss probably one that's going to be the hardest, I think, for me to really absorb into my life, and that is meekness.
Meekness. Blessed are the meekness, for they shall inherit the earth.
How can we be masculine and meek at the same time?
Well, okay, so this is a big point because most of society, and this is kind of, what's kind of weird is language is important. It's very, very important that we understand language. It's very, very important that we understand what words mean and what they don't mean. And, with that, we have to remember we are called to live in the world, but we are not called to be of the world. This is incredibly important because, Dave, we've talked in the past about things like toxic masculinity and, part of the wokeness in the world and the disordered social justice agenda. All of these things, they all play into and they all bounce off of the genuineness of what the Beatitudes are asking us to live by. And the understanding of meekness is right in line with everything that we're talking about. So I would say, and tell me if this is your impression also, when you hear the expression or the word meekness, I would guess the vast majority of people are probably thinking about weakness. They're probably thinking about
milk toast.
Milk toast, sure, or just bland or frail. Probably thinking about insignificant, small, all of those things.
Low self-esteem.
Okay, yeah, low self-esteem, just a weakness inside and easily crushed.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what else can we think of?
A doormat.
Probably a doormat, sure. Yeah, so we have this impression of what we think meekness is, but that's actually not. It's nothing according to how the church teaches us as to what meekness is. And so probably we can start by, well, let's define meekness. When we go into the catechism, we see meekness is compared to gentleness. And it's interesting that they draw that comparison because to be gentle has nothing to do with your capacity. Gentleness has nothing to do with what you're capable of. You can be, I don't know, our good friend Trace, who works out in the oil fields. I mean, that's one tough job.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, I mean, those guys are probably incredibly, well, not probably, they are incredibly strong
Mm-hmm.
physically. They probably have the capacity to like pick up a Volkswagen and move it. You know, these guys are amazing in their physical capability. Now, I would bet, and I can say this with confidence, you take those guys and you bring them into a room of children, they're not going to be knocking people around. Based upon how their inner disposition is, they will be gentle. Are we to think that guys like that don't have the capacity to hold a baby, to change a diaper, or to take, a newborn child, your daughter, hold your daughter? I mean, you can be big as a mountain. I've seen this myself. I've seen guys that are incredibly tough, strong, military men, and I've seen them holding their newborn child in their arms,
Mm-hmm.
and they weep. They weep because one has nothing to do with the other. But yet society would tell us that to be meek and humble of heart means that you have to abandon masculinity. You have to abandon your capabilities of being the fullness of what manhood is calling you to be. And so the catechism, rightly so, draws that connection between meekness and gentleness. And so that's probably the best place for us to start. One has nothing to do with the other. You can be meek and you can still be a man in its fullness. Now, we could also argue to be a man in your fullness perhaps requires the virtue of meekness, because it's through the meekness, as Jesus teaches us, through that true capacity to be the fullness of how God created you to be, and yet still be gentle. That virtue is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he says the meek shall inherit the land. So I think it's a great place to start when we take a look at the catechism and then we see the word gentleness aligned with it. So here's another definition, and this comes from Father John Hardin's Modern Catholic Dictionary. Okay, meekness, the virtue that moderates anger and its disorderly effects. It is a form of temperance that controls every inordinate movement of resentment at another person's character or behavior. And Dave, we talked about this prior to the show. Another person's character or behavior.
Right.
And I mean, we've all been confronted by characters. We've all been confronted by behaviors where we may very well have had the desire to just knock that chip right off their shoulder. Right. And anything that's connected to it.
It just seems to me that because I have come across somebody built like Trace, whose disposition was to intimidate, to dominate as many people as he could. And it just, from a distance, you look like a caricature of a man. You know, you're just not there completely as a man without that ability to tame even your own rage and your own passions.
Well, so when we take a look at meekness, and when we understand meekness as a virtue. So for every virtue, there's a corresponding and opposite vice, right? Because we have to be aware that, the devil is going to tempt us. The devil wants to trip us up, or as we've talked about in the past, wants to fuddle us, right? We talked about that from C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. So there's a vice that's associated to every virtue. And so the vice that's associated to meekness is anger. And sure, there are people that we cross paths with that make us very angry. We have to recognize, first and foremost, that there is a difference between a temptation and a sin. Every one of us are going to be tempted. Jesus was tempted. We all get tempted. And the temptations that we're going to find coming our way are most certainly going to be tailor-made. The devil's been watching us ever since we entered this world. And so the devil knows exactly those things that tempt us. The devil's been watching our personality, watching our reaction to things around us. The devil knows. The devil is aware of what pushes our buttons. And so we're going to be tempted because the devil is constantly trying to create a wedge between us and our eternal destiny with Christ. And so anger is an easy one to be tempted by. And so the devil is aware of that. And so we're going to find people crossing paths with us, circumstances. I mean, Dave, I had my computer crash last week. I thought I lost everything. Right now, I'm in school, to get a master's in mental health counseling. I'm having technology problems left and right. And it's interesting because I'll feel the anger rise up inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, I'll feel the fear of I've lost all of my work, or I've got a computer virus, or this is going on and that's going on. And it's certainly a temptation. How am I going to respond to that? How am I going to react? Am I going to pick things up and throw it across the room? Am I going to, I don't know, open up a bottle of alcohol and go on a temporary vacation and just drink? And, am I going to yell at my children and my wife? How am I going to respond to this occasion for sin?
Right.
That's the bigger question. And so the virtue of meekness would lead me rather towards anger. It would lead me towards temperance. So meekness is combined with temperance, understanding, placing things in proper measure, giving proper balance to the appropriateness of how we would respond to whatever that temptation is. And so that's when we take a look at this and we understand that we're going to be confronted by people that maybe our knee-jerk reaction would be to punch them in the face. Somebody that's just an absolute bully that is provoking you and provoking you and provoking you. And so maybe that would be our knee-jerk reaction is, you know what, this person deserves to get hit, and so I'm going to just lay it into them.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the anger. And meekness would say to us, you may very well have the capacity and the ability, but the virtue of meekness brings restraint and temperance so that you don't get not only baited, but then drawn in to actually committing the sin.
You got any tools that somebody could deal with? Because it's not as easy as counting to 10.
No. It has to be part of your attitude.
Well, because exactly what you're saying about how that rage will rise up.
Yeah.
I experienced that.
Sure.
It's like something goes wrong at work or something like that, and you just, ugh.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, I in very horrific ways. Road rage. Road rage is a perfect example of that. Somebody cuts you off and now something tragic ends up happening because you were offended, Mm-hmm. Road rage is a perfect example of this.
Right.
St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this also, where he says, meekness restrains and mitigates the onslaught or the passion of anger. And so, everything is interconnected. When we live this life of being a disciple of Jesus, when we live this life, then we start to make ourselves accessible to all of the graces that heaven has to share with us. If we're disconnected, well, then you're kind of on your own.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous. Because let's face it, without the additional graces that we need to deal with all the stuff that we have to deal with, you're by yourself. I would think if we're going to be honest with ourselves, Anytime that we think we got it all figured out, anytime we think that we can handle it by ourselves, we mess it up. We mess it up and we fall.
Sure.
And so really the tool is prayer, having a relationship, doing continuous examinations of conscience, because this becomes really pivotal when you know what your weaknesses are. This is why the sacrament of confession is so important. This is why examination of conscience is so important. You know, we hear people that are saying, yeah, well, Deacon, I don't know, I'm a moron because I find myself going into the confessional and I'm confessing the same stupid thing over and over and over again. And actually the answer is, well, good. That's a good thing. You're finally starting to target, to pinpoint that which really needs attention. Because I guarantee you, those sinful behaviors, those commissions as well as omissions, those sinful occasions, that is what you need extra grace to combat the world. That's what you need the extra grace for. So for some people, it's anger and wrath. For other people, it's lust. For some, it's greed. I mean, pick any one of the 7 deadly sins. Sloth. Oh, I'm just too lazy to go to church. I'll go every once in a while. Well, no, that's not good, because we need to plug in. You know, the genius of the commitment of going to Mass every week. The genius of that is that God recognizes He can only leave us alone for 6 days. That's the genius of it. And if we're truthful about it, we know this to be true. We can be left alone for about 6 days. Comes day number 7, we got to go back to the Father's house. We got to plug back in, and we need to be fed. We need to be humbled. And so all of this, those are the tools that we need. Those are the tools that will make this work. And it's there in front of us. That's the thing. It's not something extraordinarily difficult to find.
Mm-hmm.
Make the commitment, be humble, open yourself up, realize you can't do this alone. And it's crazy to think that you can.
So how do you begin a path towards meekness and not go from one extreme to the other, from maybe being that bully to being, Marvin Milquetoast?
Well, the first thing that we have to recognize, everyone can be meek. No matter how much anger you have inside of you, no matter what the capacity of violence within you is, everyone can be meek. It's a matter of choice. We even find in the Old Testament, in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, talking about Moses, it says, "Now Moses by far was the meekest man on the face of the earth." By far? Moses, but what do you mean by far? The guy murdered someone and buried him in the sand. But yet he's the meekest man on the face of the earth. Jordan Peterson, a psychologist that is popular out on the lecture circuit nowadays, he's got all these different programs that he does. He talks about meekness, and he says through his studies, and I tend to agree with him, he says meekness is someone that has the capacity for being violent, someone that has the capacity for being a real monster, or we can say someone that has a sword, but chooses to keep the sword in the scabbard. That's an expression of meekness. You have the capacity, but you make the choice not to go down that road. St. Francis de Sales, he spoke about meekness. He wrote, "Since it is impossible for us to go through life without causing annoyance to one another, it is necessary to have a great supply of meekness from which to draw to check sudden bursts of anger and preserve peace of soul." And so Saint Francis, he was no wallflower. And so neither are we. So when we come back from the break, we'll start talking a little bit more about that path forward. If you happen to be someone who wrestles with anger, if you happen to be somebody who holds deep, deep resentment towards another person, it's liberating to be able to walk away from that. And the idea that, you have a bad day at work and you go home and you kick the dog, well, that's not good, because now you move from one thing and you move into a whole new sin. And so we'll talk more after the break about the path forward and how to take a look inward and seek out those places within yourself where you can make a choice and you can move in a different direction.
Deacon, before we take that break, I just want to give you something to think about over the break. How about turning that violence towards yourself?
Well, that's not good either, because we see that also. Here's one thing that has always...
But isn't that the source of depression?
It certainly could be. Suicidal ideation. A lot of teenagers have done cutting, especially girls.
Mm-hmm.
The expressions that I've heard from individuals that do that sort of thing is they would say that pain is easier to deal with than the pain that they live with in the world. And so all of these things are related, because a lot of it has to do with fear and pain and a sense of hopelessness. So we'll talk a lot about that.
That's all the time we have this week. Tune in next week at this same time for the conclusion of this broadcast.
Hey, and friends, don't forget to check us out at www.castingthe.net, where you can find all our shows from the past and some stuff about us going forward in the future.
The preceding program was a Spirit of Truth Radio Arts original program for castingthe.net.